Welcome to episode 6 in the series 1 on the journey to conscious healthcare, where we explore what it takes to consciously create longevity, happiness and fulfillment in your life and that of others. The journey to conscious healthcare looks at the healthcare industry, disability sector and how to best navigate these areas to get the best for you and your life. This series is called The Do's and Don'ts of Support Coordination, where we take a look inside of what it's like to be an NDIS support coordinator and help them better navigate the ever-changing NDIS system. I'm your host, Trevor Keane, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Conscious Healthcare SA, an expert company that is known for high-quality healthcare services and transforming the healthcare industry in the disability space. Today's show is sponsored by Conscious Healthcare SA. At Conscious Healthcare SA, we provide high-quality NDIS healthcare services in the comfort of your own home. If you're interested in an easy and reliable way to navigate the NDIS and access health services, please get in touch. Today's guest graduated from Flinders University with a degree in social work, and she also boasts 5 years' experience in the disability sector. At Flinders University, where she graduated in 2018, she completed a double degree in social work and also social planning. She also delved into a couple other courses prior, but didn't quite finish, being a Bachelor of Creative Arts with creative writing focus and also majored in women's studies. In the disability sector, she started in May 2017 at Minda Incorporated, until moving into a role there at Access for You in February 2019. Previous roles included Customer Relationships Officer, Support Coordinator, interestingly though, prior to the NDIS inception, which involved coordinating programs as well as also participants. Quite interesting, that one. Block-funded programs, working as a mentor, support leader in supported independent living as well. Her role at Access for You is colourful to say the least, involving work as a social worker, senior support coordinator, and offering counselling supports for internal staff. Her interest areas within social work are domestic violence, along with drug and alcohol, which is something that she is very eager to explore. Outside of her work, she also does have her own podcast, where she does this for fun and also loves the topic of women's gender studies. Daisy Sumersford, welcome and thank you for joining us from Access for You.
Thank you for having me, Trevor. Happy to be here.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very interested. Our first question, always a personal one. I'd love to know what you wanted to do when you were going to grow up.
I think I'm one of those rare but lucky people that get to say I'm doing what I wanted to do. To an extent. I don't know if this is how exactly I imagined it, but since I was, I would say, year 8 at high school, about 14 years old, I wanted to be a school counsellor, or at least work in the mental health space. So I feel that I've pretty much got very close to achieving that goal with a social work degree and doing what I'm doing now.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you're doing that internally and also externally. Like you get to work with staff at Access for You, and you also go out there and work as a social worker in the counselling space, or how do you sort of operate?
So I pick up both referrals. So as they come into Access for You, I pick up support coordination and I pick up social work. The roles do act a little differently, but the internal counselling that I do is mainly with our mentors. So after they've lodged an incident report or something, something's happened that's caused a bit of upset or trauma, then, I will unpack that with them and that sort of thing. So the counselling mainly happens internally.
Yeah, and you quite enjoy that, obviously, as you were saying.
I love doing it, yeah.
It sounds like people probably light you up, and I'm very intrigued. One of our other questions we've got here is how you were involved early in the disability sector. So before this whole NDIS thing came around, when institutionalisation was a thing, I'm really interested if you could tell me a little bit about what it was like to be around then and sort of how it's transitioned now.
Certainly. Yes, so when I sort of started in the disability sector, I must admit it wasn't something I had planned on doing. It came to me as my final social work placement. So I went to Minda Incorporated to do that, 500 hours, And from there, I stayed there, working in different roles, as you described earlier. But it was right at that pivotal moment between the institutionalised model sort of, rolling out and the NDIS rolling in. So we were having conversations about the NDIS from the start that hadn't come into effect. And as you probably know, it rolled out to the older disability population first and the children. So that started to happen while I was still at Minda as well. But yeah, it's very strange. So the institutionalised model was happening when I was there, which was mainly group living. There was about 10 or 11, 12 people living in each home, and then we slowly started to transition them into more person-centred approach and living more independently. So yeah, it was very interesting to be a part of.
Well, how did you find that? I'm intrigued, not only you, but as a participant as well. So, how did you find as the approach changed? Was it more engaging for a participant? Was it more engaging for a therapist or a support coordinator to be involved? Because obviously the model was very different. So we're talking about institutionalisation, one size fits all, versus very much person-centred. How did things sort of change, and what was it like from experience perspective?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, and obviously this is somewhat a controversial opinion, but, I think people really, maybe working outside of the sector, really sort of saw the whole person-centred therapy and person-centred approach is the way of the future and the way to go that really empowers the participants. And I don't disagree, but we did actually have a large percentage of the participants who had been there since, a lot of them at Minda specifically had been there since they were babies, and now elderly. They were very apprehensive to move over to the new model. So a lot of them had a lot of anxiety, a lot of fears about the change that was occurring. So that was really interesting, and something that I adopted as part of my sort of thesis, if you will, of my last placement was around measuring and looking into that anxiety that they were experiencing with the change and how it's affecting them. So, yeah, there was a lot of apprehension, if I'm honest, about the change, more than people were clapping and welcoming the idea, which, a lot of participants wanted to stay living in their big group homes.
I suppose you're familiar. I mean, we're all humans, right? Change is one of the things that people don't tend to lean into too much.
Absolutely.
On the flip side of that now, though, how's it like now being on the other side? You're in the NDIS now, and are you finding that this is a better model to work in? Or what are your thoughts?
I think it's, for the most part, it is a better model to work in, specifically around what you were saying before for the therapists. I think we get to work a lot more independently and autonomously, and, I think we're encouraged to have a better sort of sense of connection and things with our clients rather than working as a sort of, it's more, we get to have a bit more of a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach, you know what I mean? So the NDIS kind of allows for that more so because it is person-centred, so it's very focused on each individual. And their support needs and, us being able to identify that rather than looking at people as groups and things. So I think from a therapy perspective, it's preferred, yeah. But obviously we know the NDIS comes with its own challenges.
Yeah, well, speaking of challenges, I think that's sort of a good one. I'd love to go into, let's dive in deep straight away. Why not?
Okay, go for it.
So support coordinators, we're talking a little bit before about some of the limitations that are in place. What's holding support coordinators back?
So in terms of the do's and don'ts of support coordination, I would very much like to say do not underappreciate the support coordinator. As, one of the fundamental limitations that we face on a day-to-day basis is around that case management side of what I'd almost say is the expectation from the participant. I don't think there's very clear language around what we can and can't do within our role, but we know that we are sort of limited in what we can do in terms of advocacy, and that choice and control really limits us as well in some respects because we're there to empower the client with choice, but we're also not supposed to really give any advice or give any bias or explain, which organisation we think they should go with. Opinions are sort of not welcomed. So in that respect, I find it quite limiting. We're not really able to, I guess, be as hands-on and as helpful as we'd maybe like to be. And I think the participant often will want a more case management approach, which we can't really provide.
Yeah, it's really challenging. It sounds a little bit like being a bit hamstrung, or you got your hands below your bottom or something like that. You sort of can't delve into the areas where you really feel like would make the most difference. Interesting about the whole role thing though, like Aaron Byrne, I was on a webinar a while back. There's a bunch of different, there's about 80 of us that were in there, and he spoke very well. I'm interested. There's some guidelines I've heard that are coming out, so I feel like you might welcome something like that, some guidelines about.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. Look, and the other thing is I do two roles, as I explained before, one of which is social work, and I really sort of rejoice in working at that capacity because I can advocate, I can empower, and I know that the fundamental sort of principle behind choice and control is, to allow the participant to make their own informed decisions. But a lot of the time they are saying to us, can you help me, which of these is the better option? Where should I go? Who's the right person to speak to? And to have that limitation of going, here's some options for you, but I can't, weigh in any further than that. So when I'm working as a social worker, I really appreciate the ability to sort of say, hey, this is what I would do. And I feel like there's more of a human side to it and a bit more of a authentic approach that I can take as a social worker. Yeah,
it is a tricky space where, it's great when you can jump in, but equally if you can't jump in, it's sort of a bit frustrating that, you feel like you're maybe not doing what you can, you're feeling a bit helpless. But on a positive note, the AASW, social worker reform and everything else like that's going through. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that, but I thought it'd be great to sort of give a bit of a shout out as you are a social worker, of course.
To be honest with you, I'm not overly familiar with what's happening at the moment. Are there going to be changes happening?
Yeah, so it's pretty exciting about the new sort of space with social work, greater recognition and just increasing of scope will then come with that, because if you get the professional bodies behind it, you get the recognition from the public funders and stuff like that, then that creates more doors to open for you.
It's funny that you say that because it is actually a bit of a strange application in the NDIS, social work. People haven't really utilised it very appropriately or well, I would say, and that's not to criticise anybody. I just think it's across the NDIS, but I don't think social work's being very well understood and very well translated into the disability sector, because I think a lot of the time people will go straight to developmental education for very, very much what social workers can do as well. So I don't think the social work's really been as explored as it probably should be in the disability sector.
Scope of practice and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like we're opening up the can of worms. OT can do just about everything, but hang on, wait up. We're talking paediatrics. A physio can do similar things to what an OT can do, and then you've got developmental educators, as you're saying, and social workers that can also play in the same space. I think fundamentally it's actually more about, hey, what can we actually do to help a participant?
Absolutely.
Not necessarily if it's a particular discipline, because I'm sick of seeing waitlists. I don't know about you. I'd love to see everyone get service now. Yesterday is good, now's great, but yesterday was better.
I know, exactly. And, with social work, you really, while you're sort of studying social work, you're learning about connecting the individual to their environment and making the personal political. So we do have that overview of how a person will fit into their environment and their situation, and we look at things holistically. So I think we're being maybe underappreciated. Maybe we could explore social work and disability a bit more.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very valid point. I mean, that's something at our business we've sort of thought about a little bit as far as with functional capacities. So I think we might have had this conversation previously, but we'll open it up to the public. Yeah. But fundamentally, I don't know why. If you blend a social work and a physio together, don't you get it pretty close to an OT, something like that, right?
Yeah, you do.
And I think if you've got wait lists that are so big, I mean, obviously there's some barriers there. We talk about those. We'll get into that a bit more. But I suppose it's a little bit like, well, the NDIS loves having OTs do reports, occupational therapists, which, don't get me wrong, we've got OTs at our business. You've worked with plenty of OTs and all that. They're fantastic. I think the biggest thing is there's not enough of them.
No.
So if we've got people that can do the work, as you're saying, a social worker or whoever else.
Why aren't we upskilling?
Giving that opportunity? I'd rather see someone actually get a service now than have to wait. I mean, talk about developmental delay, or it doesn't matter what it is. It's people's life. That's what it is. Just waiting for a technical title seems a little bit silly.
Absolutely. I think they should be offering some sort of postgrad study, or if you're entering the sector, some study to do functional capacity assessments from a social worker, or, let's have more people doing these things instead of just limiting it to, occupational therapists, as you say, or Vineland's assessments being completed by developmental educators and psychologists. Social workers can do them too. So it's about upskilling, I guess, once you get into the sector.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating you say that, because upskilling, you talk about it at the start before, it's like, hey, as a support coordinator, you're sort of sitting there with your hands, tied down. You can't do too much, right? But then equally, we've got participants that are out there that don't really know what a physio, they don't know what an OT is. They might not even know what a mentor does. It doesn't really matter. Or accommodation, what accommodation options are out there. So how are we then meant to hand that over to a participant to make that decision if they're not aware? Now, some are, that's fine, if you can self-manage or if you've got the ability to do so. I'd love that, because I'm all for increasing capacity. But it's such a challenging one as well, isn't it? Like, what do you do if they don't have the insight possibly, or even the knowledge? Because you've got to educate, and that takes a bit of time, but it's not fun or sexy, is it?
No, and that's exactly where support coordinators are so valuable, because that is kind of what we do. We empower with knowledge around, this is what a physio does. This is what an occupational therapist can do for you. A mentor would be good to support you with X, Y, and Z. So we are good at sharing that NDIS knowledge, and often, amongst myself and my colleagues will quite often say, God, I can't imagine what people are doing without support coordination in their plan, if it's a new plan or particularly participants with intellectual disabilities that might, have some difficulty navigating the NDIS. I mean, it's hard for anyone to navigate the NDIS. But support coordination is great in that sense, because we are able to give that inside knowledge and, empower with choice and control. It's just when it comes to actually, helping the person take that next step that we seem to not be allowed to sort of be involved from there. Well,
as far as being educated, I know you're saying support coordinators educate, absolutely huge part of the role. But about how do support coordinators get educated? I mean, we talk about getting into the sector, and when you get into the sector, you've got a social work degree. So obviously I'm a physiotherapist, and so we have general knowledge about different skill sets and background, but fundamentally we would have an understanding in regards to what the different disciplines do. Maybe not enough, many would argue still, but what about someone who's not coming from an allied health background, someone who's had maybe lived experience, or might just want to join the disability sector themselves? I mean, how are they going about getting educated and up to speed? Because there's so much we can talk about changing space.
It's interesting you say that, because I have encountered a few support coordinators over my time that have come in quite green, limited disability background, limited knowledge, but I guess in those situations, personal experiences come into play as well. Sometimes they might have family members with disability, understanding from that perspective. But to be truthful, the training kind of comes primarily from that DCS webpage, where we do all the webinars and do like a 2-week kind of induction training period. But, having a background in disability is absolutely key, really, for support coordinators, or having some level of knowledge, because that is where you'll be starting from. There's a starting point with support coordination to have that knowledge, pretty much. Yeah,
I can understand that. That'd be hugely advantageous. What I'm interested in as well is, what about catch-ups and all sorts of stuff, cross-collaboration, not just internally. Is there enough of that sort of goes on to sort of help?
No, not at all.
What can we put in place? I mean, I'm spitballing here with you.
I would love to have more interaction. And do you know what? As support coordinators, we also find it quite challenging, because we are so isolated, even internally. That's to no fault of the organisations. It's just that we act very independently. A lot of us work from home, particularly at the moment. But there isn't a lot of teamwork, and that's something that's really missing. And I think we all feel that. We sort of wish we could have more opportunity to, like we're doing, spitball with each other, go over what's the experience of the support coordinator. How can we work better? Those sorts of conversations don't get to be had as often as we'd like. So in terms of answer your question, I'm not sure. Maybe more expos and more opportunities for us to get together. And I don't know, what's your suggestion with that?
I'm not really sure. I mean, I suppose even casually catching up, whether it's over a drink, soft drink or beer, whatever it might be, having those sort of opportunities is great. I think I quite often go out to networking events to get to know, obviously, on the different side of things as a therapist. But I think it's really great getting to know different support coordinators and what people do, because everyone's a bit different as well. There's thousands of support coordinators. I mean, we're Adelaide, there's thousands of support coordinators around, but everyone's a little bit different. And I think being able to collaborate, pick up the phone, whether you work at the same organisation or not, and helping each other out, I do feel like it is a pretty nurturing space and all that. You have to forge those relationships, and it takes some time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And that was very refreshing, actually, when I first came across yourself and, you'd introduced yourself to me and we had a bit of a discussion similar to as we're having right now. And, I thought it was really great because I, at the time, was working with one of your occupational therapists who did a really wonderful functional capacity assessment for my participant. And I remember you rang me to check in and see how it's going. And I think those sorts of phone calls and those sorts of efforts are needed more, even if we're just reaching out to say, hey, how did that go? Or, what were the outcomes? What were the benefits to that practitioner? And how do they work? And, sort of sharing that knowledge a bit more would probably be warranted in this space.
I hear on that note. I think fundamentally, I've had this come up a few times. I love to hear your thoughts. Communication, transparency, being heard, felt understood, I think is really important in this space because, an OT report or, as a support coordinator, when you're doing these large reports, sometimes the line's quiet. So a participant might think, hey, nothing's going on, but quite often a lot's happening, whether you see it or not. But I think just being in the loop is really important. I think communication in this space is more important than anything.
Absolutely. And that is something that is encouraged a lot at my organisation, at Access View. I can't really speak on behalf of any other organisations. But we are encouraged to get in contact with our participants, at least once a week, even if it's just a phone call, and, sending reports of things that we're doing, so they do understand that there is a lot of, like, if I identified a lot of the support coordination and social work is happening sort of behind the scenes. And I think for the participants to be made aware of that and, sort of track along with us is important.
Yeah, and having positive feedback passed on and that as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Because good news doesn't fly probably as well as it bloody well should, I reckon.
No. Bad news seems to, though.
Yeah, it does. Well, and not only that, look, we face adversity every day. I think that's fair to say. And I don't think that's probably going to change in a hurry, but I think how you go about that and having people that try it, that you walk along with, hopefully this is what we're providing for other support coordinators, hearing themselves and their experiences.
It's a very unique experience, I think, just working in the disability sector. And like you said, I come across other people from external organisations, often enough. And it's interesting, all of our shared experiences, even though whatever walk of the NDIS you come from, we all have those very unique bonding experiences that are, I guess, to this sector. And I know, speaking on behalf of myself and my colleagues, we really relish in the opportunity to get together and chat because we know that most people don't understand what it's like to do our role and to do our job. So I think any opportunity to have more of that is welcomed. And this podcast probably is helping along the way.
Hopefully. Well, whilst we talk about passionate things, there's a bit of a case study I think you've got to share. Someone that you were working with previously in regards to having some difficulties. We might open a can of worm. Why not? Let's crack the lid.
Yeah, let's do it. So this is interesting actually because, as we were saying before, the NDIS is like an ever-changing space. And when this is earlier in my time at Access View in my role, I came across a participant or referral of a young lady, about 27, who had recently lost her vision entirely. She was complaining of headaches, going to a doctor, and she was getting dismissed over and over again. He was saying that she probably had a migraine and, take some Panadol and what have we. And then she woke up one morning and was completely legally blind, lost her vision entirely. So I came into the picture on her first NDIS plan, which was very underfunded. So we went straight to review before we did anything else. And she was saying to me, one of the main supports she really felt she needed was psychology, because she's dealing with complete loss of vision. And, this is somebody that could see yesterday and today can't, and dealing with the ramifications that will have on your mental health. And so she said, all I really want out of my NDIS plan is so I can talk to someone about this experience. I said, yeah, no worries. So I put all of the, we got an O2 functional capacity assessment, got all the right reports, did all the right steps, went to review, came back with the new plan, and they denied funding for psychology, stating that it was not related to the disability. So there you go.
That opens up a can of worms there. I mean, I'm a bit of a psychology student by day and night. I love psychology.
So do I.
We've had a few different people with psych backgrounds sort of come through the podcast.
Yeah.
It's really intriguing. There's a thing called disenfranchised loss. Now, I don't know how much you know about that, but I mean, the example there, you go through someone that's become deaf, like they're still alive, but, like people can't understand what that was like to then be able to see. You could see before and now you can't, so that's a loss. That's a real loss, but you're still around, and coming to terms with. I mean, quite often this actually happens when you talk about stroke. So someone has a stroke, the person that they were known to be is sort of now dead. They're alive, of course, but they're not the same person. They're not kicking the football or throwing the netball or playing a hit of tennis or something like that, where they could before. Now they've actually got to come back on that journey. I mean, that's a real disability-related thing. You would have thought, that's related to the disability, the fact that you become blind.
Absolutely. It's very similar to, acquired brain injury participants, ABI participants. So, yesterday could have been someone totally different that everyone knew as so-and-so, and then, have an unfortunate accident that resulting in head injury, where, they have to readjust to life as a completely different person and go through all those experiences. And one would argue that it is absolutely related to the disability, particularly with my participant who lost her vision. I mean, I would say that she's experiencing those mental health concerns or sharing those mental health concerns because she lost her vision. So that is, I would argue, related to the disability. And I tried to argue it. I did a review of a reviewable decision. You have to say that one slowly because review of a reviewable decision. Yeah, so we went back to review straight away, and I tried to argue again. But like I said earlier, support coordinators limited in what we can argue, but I tried to get all the right evidence in place.
Yeah.
And still it continued getting denied. So it's just unfortunate. However, I will make mention, though, there seems to be some positive changes in that now. Like we're seeing, psychosocial recovery coaching and psychosocial-based disabilities being a bit, met with greater respect from the NDIS, I think. But it's just, where do we start to include those people that it's not necessarily a psychosocial-based disability that has a psychosocial impact?
Yeah, massive. I was talking to Scott Willis, the APA president, earlier this week, and we were talking about physiotherapy. Now, you talk about mental health and all that. One of the conversations that came out was just when you're talking about mental health, so if someone's on a physio table or if someone's doing some exercise, it's amazing how much they'll just open up. Yeah. I'm sure you probably see that. I bet your support coordinator says all the time about coming to an initial conversation and the world opens up. The participant just pours out their heart just because they've had so much going on. I think there's so much to be said about actually having someone just to be there, to be heard and understood and to actually
validated. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, it's a challenging one as far as to see where that's going to land up, because psychosocial recovery coaches are becoming more and more popular, it seems. Support coordinator hours, I don't know if you've sort of seen a crunch on that or how that's looking.
Massively, yeah. I don't want to put my foot in it, but yes, there's a huge decrease in support coordination funds. And it's interesting what you were saying before around upskilling and trainings, and it's very true what you say, is that a lot of time participants will just pour out their heart and tell you what's going on in their life. And, it's interesting, we don't really encourage or have a great deal of mental health training, even just for support coordinators. Obviously, the psychosocial recovery coaches require that mental health background or training. But it's interesting because one could argue anyone working in this sector should maybe have a bit of knowledge around it.
Oh, absolutely. Hugh from the Resilience Project goes through that quite a lot. And I was reading this book, I don't know if you've seen it, but wow, I've got to share about this Let Go, amazing book.
Okay.
And it just goes through in regards to mental health and, suicide, lots of different things. Topics that aren't sexy, but you know what? It's real. Like, people have struggles. Like, we're talking about COVID times. We're talking about a time where we need to connect more than ever. I think it's really important that we, don't close off to that. Whether it's mental health, first aid, upskilling, or it doesn't matter what it is exactly, but the point is growing and developing is really important to just be able to be your best self when you rock up. Support coordinator, as a therapist, whatever it might be.
Massively. And it's funny that you say that, because whilst it's not sexy, like, majority of us are experiencing mental health. And, being compromised mental health due to COVID situation for all of us. But, I think our participants particularly would benefit from us having that greater understanding, that connection to mental health. Because you see it all the time, it's everywhere.
And normalising the conversation.
And normalising it, absolutely.
Yeah, that's really big. Whilst we talk about growth, mentors, they're always a good place for growth, or anyone that sort of helped you along your journey that you'd like to give a shout out to at all, how they might have influenced you.
I've met some wonderful people along the way. I've got a couple of people I could mention. Kathy Miller, who's our CEO at Access for You, was also my CEO at Minda. So she's been quite, pivotal in that transition from institution to the person-centred approach. And I feel like Access for You was kind of born out of that transition. Sort of, we took what we knew from the past and then opened up a new business around the future. I think Kathy has been very sort of, a pioneer.
Love it. Great work.
in that area. So I appreciate her. I've also had some wonderful managers who turned into friends, such as Karen McHugh, I would mention as being a really good mentor to me. You meet wonderful people in this sector all the time. Big hearts, big minds.
Yeah, massively. Yeah. I think a lot of people, doesn't matter what role you're in, I think having mentors is always a good thing. I can't remember who said the quote, but it was something about like having someone that's sort of got a greater skill level than you, someone that has got a lower skill level, and then someone is where you're at as well. So it's some sort of philosophy. I was reading it the other day, but I think that's really true. Like, so you're actually stretching yourself, learning more as a support coordinator or whatever your role is, but then also teaching others. I find it really amazing when you've got new support coordinators on the block and how we can actually get them up to speed and have this really weird beast that's moving around actually seeing comprehended.
Yeah, absolutely.
Information, lots of it out there, good, bad, ugly. Where do you go to get it?
That's an interesting question, isn't it? Because I find the NDIS have their own language, as you know. So I think the short answer to that is that you would go to your NDIS website and look at the information, but it's about understanding that language. So really I find people that have worked in, like you said before, more experienced people with a lot of knowledge, I would often go to maybe a superior or something to better my understanding of something. But in terms of just the general public accessing information, I suppose, through the NDIS or through local organisations and providers have usually got a lot of information.
Yeah, that's the way you go. Well, as far as recommendations, I'm always interested. So bad recommendations that you hear from support coordinators or things you might get support coordinators to steer away from.
I told you we're not allowed to recommend anything. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, recommendations. As in recommendations for organisations to use, or recommendations
or
around?
As a support coordinator, how can a support coordinator better handle themselves? What are some pitfalls? I remember Sian from Here to Home, she was talking in regards to, say, like, it might be time blocking.
Absolutely, time
or it might be, hey, know that you don't have to know it all.
And overextending yourself.
Like that.
Overextending yourself happens a lot. Burnout happens a lot because we are put in that awkward position of pretty much case managing without being allowed to, but it's kind of happening anyway. So I think, you can quickly get burnt out. A lot of us, our caseloads, exist around 30 to 40 participants all at once, and we're trying to sort of help them, support them in their world, and it becomes very intrusive into your personal life as well. So I think my advice for support coordinators would be to, one that I learned actually in university was, have like a necklace or a item of jewelry, whatever you want to wear, that you wear to work and that you take off when you get home to kind of give you that mental trigger around, I'm letting work stay at work. So it's like a physical representation of you checking in and checking out.
Some say the piece of paper, screw it up into a ball, place it in the bin, your day's done and such.
Yeah, because you do, if you're an empathic person, you're going to be involved with your clients, and they say, have that protective wall up, and that's usually the advice. But the truth is sometimes you can't help yourself but have compassion and empathy and want to help people. And so I think it's just around making sure that you still pay equal attention to your own personal well-being as well, not getting too lost in trying to help everybody.
Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? There's very much helping people that want to help that get drawn to this industry, very much loving, caring, nurturing.
That's right.
People that have got hearts of gold, and then, you've got a system that's moving left, right and centre. And I think it's just really about having good people around and actually having your boundaries. Boundaries is a big one. That was brought up many a time. Is that something you're pretty good with, having boundaries in place? You talk about taking that place off. You switch your phone off when you get home, or how do you sort of handle it?
Yeah, and we're encouraged to do that. You're working between the hours of 9 to 5, or whenever you choose. Thankfully, support coordinators are quite flexible when we can work. But it's about making sure you have those restrictions in place. Like I'm going to turn my phone off, or I'm going to close my laptop down, and those sorts of things that to sort of preserve your own mental well-being. But absolutely, having people around you that can lift you up and I think, this is just a personal opinion. I feel as though I do have a good understanding, a comprehensive understanding of what it means to be professional and to have professionalism. But I also don't think people should be considered professional beings 24/7. So I think having that relatability as well, and a bit of sort of humanity to your approach and support coordination, whether it be dressing down or casual and meeting with clients, feeling, creates that feeling, I guess, for them of a bit more comfortability and relating. Not that you're there as some sort of...
being approached, it's like that's cultural sensitivity, I would argue, as far as being appropriate when you're rocking up. And
absolutely.
You don't want to create a divide there naturally just because you're not rocking up in a suit. Right?
Exactly. No.
Someone's missed a memo off that.
Yeah, so finding that line between making sure you are professional but also relatable.
Yeah, well, talk about counselling that. We've got a nice little segue here. So support coordinators, dare I say it, they have a little bit of stress involved. They've got some constant obstacles coming their way. How do you reckon they should look after themselves? Like, as in you talked about just before about taking off your necklace. What is it, taking a bath? Like, what sort of things do support coordinators do to just let go?
I'll tell you something. This is something I have noticed. Try not to talk about work when you're not there, because us support coordinators do have a tendency to just carry on and on and on, talking to each other out of a desire to, and to offload, to, and what have we. But I think it's important to actually remind yourself, hold on, let's not carry on this conversation all the time, because we need to have that personal life that's really separated. So I think that would be something else I would advise, is to just... keep work at work and do things like go for a run, release some endorphins. And if you're not a big exercise person, like admittedly I'm not the biggest exercise person, but I'll usually after work, I'll go for a walk around my neighbourhood and just sort of do things that are a bit calming of the mind, read a book, do some colouring in, things that just very slow paced and can kind of recenter yourself a little bit.
Podcasts and stuff like that as well. I mean, we'll have to mention your podcast that you do. Maybe we won't give it a plug unless you really want to. But
I would like to. I'll mention my podcast. We do. It's very different. It's probably a bit of a, what do they say? NSFW, not safe for work edition. But it's more about dating and lifestyle, and but it's good. We've interviewed a few. Cool characters like Tash Hers from Married at First Sight. She was the first LGBTQ contestant, and we will be interviewing Irene Thornton, who was married to Bon Scott. So it's something that we both, myself and my co-host, we really enjoy doing our podcast as a bit of an unwind.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, having something to get delve your feet into, and something you're passionate about. I'm really passionate about sharing stories with people and seeing how we can sort of help others. So I think it's a really good thing. Typical day, have we got one? What's a typical day look like for you?
Typical day, God, that would be much easier to answer before COVID, before we had this.
Well, let's launch in with COVID times, right?
COVID time. So at the moment, it used to be, getting up and going to the office. Now it's getting up and going to the home office. So we're all working from home. But a typical day will be getting up in the morning, and usually I'll check my emails to start off with, report writing, checking in on participants, make sure they're doing okay, because like we said earlier, this COVID situation is affecting everybody in different ways.
Yeah, massively.
So it's just checking in on your participants, making sure that their supports are all up to date, if they need anything. But typical day is very much changed at the moment, because we are having to grapple with COVID situation. So we used to, if I was to call up one of my participants, how are you going? Is everything okay? What would you want to touch base? And, normally, yes, we'll go and have a catch up and, whatever they need. But we can't really be doing that at the moment. So we're having to transition over to mainly, Zoom and those sorts of things. But it's become a challenge because so many of our participants don't have that sort of technology and means to communicate in that way. So typical day, very much different at the moment. We're trying our best to support our participants in a COVID-friendly fashion.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talk about that, supporting participants, but isolation, huge. I mean, what do you say, and engagement? How do you get people to engage better? Some people don't feel like, sometimes you bump into someone and you speak up and you say something, whereas otherwise you can go a long time, not a lot happening. So
that's right. So usually at the moment, sport coordination is very busy, but normally I really do miss face-to-face, even though it's only been a couple of weeks. I really miss face-to-face because it is a better opportunity for the participants to feel like they can open up, and there's a lot of non-verbal communication opportunity. So I feel like they probably do tend to feel more encouraged to give you the full story and unpack things with you a bit more in person. But I think it's just about making sure you are putting in that effort. Just keep giving them a call or sending a text as well. Some of my participants prefer that I just text and things, but it's just checking in, making sure everything's okay. Particularly like the participants, which is, I would say, I'm going to go off a limb here and make up my own statistics now. I reckon about 70% of my participants have a mentor.
Yeah.
So that's the key sort of service that I'll always be checking in on, just making sure that's happening regularly and that they're getting, their support needs met. So a lot of the time these are participants that are, their mentor is helping them with their shopping, taking them to their appointments, those really important parts of their life. So just checking in around those services, make sure they're operating as per usual.
All sort of well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of well-oiled, so when support coordination is done well, specialists or general, doesn't matter. So what's it look like? What's a good support coordinator look like? Let's just describe the ideal support coordinator.
Sure. Transparency. I think that's very valuable quality in a support coordinator, is to be open and honest and transparent, because the reason I say that is a lot of the time you find that your participant will have a lot of funding concerns, and instead of, I think, giving that false sense of, okay, we can take you to a review and you'll get everything you're asking for. Yeah, it's about that honesty around what, curbing some enthusiasm, I think, around expectations with funding, and just explaining to the participant the processes as well. I think that's really important, because some support coordinators, miss out on that part of the communication, which is, I'm going to be doing this, and then this will happen, and then this is the eventual outcome, hopefully. So instead of just going, okay, thank you, and then going off and doing things behind the scenes that they're not really understanding why. So I think, transparency, regular communication, regular contact, and I guess it's difficult though, because a lot of us have a lot of participants. So time management's important as a support coordinator too. And how you prioritise. This is another can of worms as well, I'm sure. It is around the office.
Coming out though. This has been very regularly spoken about by the support coordinators as well. Prioritisation, time blocking.
That's it.
All those sort of things that go on, and self-compassion as well. I think the tendency to maybe have more on your plate than what you can probably handle.
I think, and the
trying to bite off too much, I guess. The elephant all at once.
One bite at a time. That is a definite positive aspect to a support coordinator is time management, because it's very difficult to have good time management, if I'm honest, in this role, because and how to prioritize. Because, for example, let's say I've got a few reports and things due that I'm writing, then a client may call me with some sort of a crisis situation. That becomes the priority. But, our day-to-day is very much like that. You might be writing something, someone calls you, they need support over here while you're doing that, and it becomes a very sort of difficult thing to navigate in a really organised sort of way. So I think good time management skills and a good understanding of what's the priority, which is usually a crisis situation will come above a report. So it's about managing that, I think.
And maybe team support, I'm sort of hearing as well, like if you're sort of not able to keep up or something like that, having others around you or coming up with ideas so you're not just getting stuck and being paralysed by that, I guess. So if you've got a team of support coordinators, or I sort of wonder a little bit about support coordinators that are independent, so they're just a one-man band or one-woman band as such. What do they do?
Yeah, it's
as far as, like holiday switching off, I was talking to a support coordinator this morning, I won't mention her exactly, but this lovely lady, and she's on holidays, flick through a couple of referrals, and I'm like, you're on a holiday, and I suppose that happens all the time, and it doesn't sort of, support coordination.
It doesn't stop. There's no start and finish. I'll tell you actually a good idea that was proposed to me by one of my colleagues who we've mentioned before, Jake Tiver. He's another support coordinator at my workplace. He actually made a suggestion that we should maybe have almost somewhat of an understudy when we're taking on participants. So in the event that we need to have a bit of a collaborative approach or some offloading or interchangeability with support coordination. So actually we haven't implemented that, but I think it's a good idea to be workshopped, having someone else that knows your client, with all the right consent to share information in place, but someone and all the red tape, tick off all the red tape boxes first, but then having someone else that understands your client's needs as well, so you can kind of workshop ideas about, hey, this is, because you can find yourself feeling really isolated. You've got a very complex participant with a lot of complex support needs, and sometimes you find yourself going, what am I going to do here? You know what I mean? Like, how do I approach this? And so I think it would be good to have sort of someone that you can back and forth with that knows your client's situation as well.
I think that's really important. I mean, if you think about it, no one lasts around forever. And it's not only that, it's like what happens when you go on leave and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you don't typically, if you've got 35 or 40 participants, I can't imagine you having a look at when all that plan reviews are meant to be and then sort of scheduling your leave around that. So you want to be there in times when you need to be there, and I guess having someone else that could take on that would be really important. And that flexibility as well, fresh eyes as well, different ideas. I mean, I think that's why I really like multidisciplinary practice, and I think that you get good ideas from doing that sort of stuff. So I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
Well, we've come to that time. It's our final question.
Sure.
So let's pretend it's 20 years into the future and we've achieved success. Yep, we've got achieved success in the disability sector. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Paint me a picture.
Okay, that's an interesting question. Because what a wild question. It's like, how is that going to look? I think the future really is more of a holistic approach, like we have been talking about throughout this episode. It's, working more collaboratively, sharing more information, upskilling individuals. I think, and practitioners, I think the future would be everyone working less silos, more open-ended sort of support, people working collaboratively, and having that real holistic look and overview of each participant. And sharing it more information, working more together as a team. I think that would probably benefit the NDIS.
Sounds like a ripple, chucking a little pebble in a pond or a lake or something.
I'm probably asking too much, aren't I?
Oh, well, no, I think it's good, like, as in seeing that ripple effect go on as far as how everyone working together can really get a great outcome. Having a participant thrive. Goals, hopes, aspirations, dreams, all that.
And like I said, less silos, people being less sort of standoffish around wanting to share their information and wanting to, work together. I think the future would be much brighter if we were all sort of helping one another to help our participants.
Well, here's to a bright future, eh?
Yeah.
We've been talking to Daisy Sumersford, an engaging, passionate social worker and special support coordinator from Access for You. Daisy, where can people go to get a bit more information about what you do?
So you can find more information around what we do at www.accessforyou.org.au. And there's plenty of information about the services that we offer, the practitioners that we have. Because at Access for You, we do have the majority of services available to our participants. So, mentoring, developmental education, and support independent living. So, I would just advise to go onto our website and have a look.
Thank you so much for your time.
No worries. Thank you.